Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. I've been playing around with an idea for another bag, and this is the one that I've come up with today. Isn't the colour gorgeous? We've got a big pocket on the front, another big pocket on the back. We've got contrast panels along the side, box corners, self-made handles, a recessed zip. So there's 3 zips in this bag. If you're not good at doing zips when you start this bag, you'll be an expert when you're finished. And on the inside, there's quite a lot of space, and we've got an internal pocket as well. Now, I've made a couple of mistakes with this. So you will see the side panel looking much bigger than it's turned out. All the measurements that will be up on the screen shortly are the correct measurements to make this bag. But you will notice that the side panels, when I first start putting them together, will be a lot wider than what they are now. I've made a big mistake, so I've had to make an adjustment in the pattern. I also forgot to put the pocket on the inside. So before you attach the lining to the bag, stick your pocket on the lining. Come and join me whilst I show you how to make this bag. All right, because we're putting a few zips in and a few pockets as well, there's going to be a lot of pieces to this bag. I'm using this for the outer fabric. It's 60 by 30 centimetres or 24 by 12 inches. What I did when I cut this piece of fabric out was I cut it out from the width of your fabric at 12 inches wide or 30 centimetres. And from that, I've cut 4 extra strips that are the same width. So these are 12 inches or 30 centimetres. And we want 2 of them that are 6 centimetres or 2.5 inches wide. The other 2 will be 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches wide. We've also got an internal pocket, the same 12 inches. And I've just cut a piece that's 13 inches, so it's 12 by 13 inches, which is 33 by 30 centimetres. Then I've got 2 other pockets that are the same size, so these will be my outside pockets. They're also 33 by 30 centimetres or 13 by 12 inches, so we want 2 of those. I'm going to use regular dress zips today. I've got 3 here. For the contrast fabric on the side of the bag, I'm using this, I think it's called an ombre. It'll make a nice contrast. I actually need 2 of these, so I'll need to cut another one out. For the contrast, we want 2 pieces that are 59 by 8 centimetres or 23.25 by 3.25 inches. And the length I'll keep in one whole piece for now. And for our handles, we want 1 long piece from the width of your fabric. I'll want to stabilise this as well, so I'll find something to use in the middle of that. And I was hoping I could use this for the lining, but now that I have to cut an extra piece, I don't think I can. So we need a lining fabric. I'll find something for that shortly. And once again, the dimensions for the lining fabric, we will find out what that is soon, but you will find out before I do. And the stabiliser I'm using for the outer fabric is this really lightweight fusible fleece. It's called Parlan. That's it there. So if you're in Australia and you want that, I do have that on my website. But you can use any type of Palin or fleecy. Really, it's totally up to you. If you wanted a stiffer bag, you can use Decaville or foam. Stabilisers are really just personal choice. I'm hoping that's all I'm going to need for this. The measurements for the stabiliser will also be on the screen as well now. And even though you'll see different sizing in the fabric that we're using throughout the video, the size on this list here is correct. The first thing I want to do is prepare the fabric for my handles. So this is the piece that's 4 inches or 10 centimetres wide, and I'm using the entire length of the fabric as well. I'll cut it in half later. First of all, we want to fold the fabric in half, and then we'll fold that so that the raw edges meet in the middle, and then this will close up your handle. I want to put a stabiliser inside that, and I have this product. It's just a very lightweight, fusible, I guess it's an interfacing. I'm not really sure what the name of it is, but it's double-sided. So if you're doing hems, you could actually just lay it down, and I think it could be a hemming tape, but you just lay the 2 pieces of fabric over the top of each other, fuse it, and it keeps your hem in place. So that's what I'm using for my stabiliser today. You could cut up any strip of interfacing that you wanted. or even some of your fusible fleece that you're using for the outside of the bag. Depends on how much structure you want your handle to have. I don't think I need too much. So it's a little bit narrower, but I'm putting one piece to one side and the other piece I'll put to the closer fold as well. And what that does, as my fabric pieces come together, it distributes the fusible product so that I've got an even amount on both sides of the fold. It's just another way of avoiding cutting out extra fabric or extra stabilizer. So I've placed those two pieces in between the fabric, fold those together, and I'll take that to the iron or my heat press and fuse that together. If you're using a product like this, you want to make sure that you get rid of any excess, because this will melt onto your iron and it won't be very good for it. I'm going to give that another press and set that one aside. Next, we want to take our 4 narrow strips, and I've got 4 narrow strips of fusible fleece to put on the top. So I'll just center that over the fabric, making sure the fusible side is facing the back of my fabric. I've had lots of people ask if I would show how I put my stabilizers on, so I'll take you over to the heat press in a moment and show you what I do. It's really just very simple. I just press the button and it does it itself. So those 4 can go over to the heat press. Then we'll take the large outer piece of fabric. This piece is just a tiny little bit smaller or narrower than what I need, but it was almost the right size and I don't want to waste it, so I'm going to use it because it won't be noticed in the seam allowance. So once you've got your stabilizer evenly placed on your fabric, we can take this to the iron or the heat press and fuse it together. Let's do that now. So I have my heat press heating up at the moment. I'm just waiting for that to let me know that it's ready. And I've set it to an auto function, so that means it will press down by itself when I close this. I'll place my fabric over my pressing area, and I've had many times where the fusible stuff has accidentally been pressed to the wrong side, so I always use an applique sheet or a Teflon sheet. I place that over the top, make sure everything's nice and smooth. This section's really hot, so just stay away from the heat there. And as soon as this is ready, I can stick it under. In fact, I'm usually impatient. I tend not to wait. This goes for 20 seconds. It'll come up by itself. And then I'll just check that it's fused. And if it hasn't, I'll do it again. And if everything's good, then I can put these aside. With a larger piece like this, I have to do it in stages. So I'll place my fabric down onto the bed evenly, smooth out any wrinkles. Once that side's done, I can turn it around and do the rest. So if I had a really big piece, I might have to do that in 4 or 6 sections. And I've raised the entire heat press off the table so that the fabric can drape down the sides. All right, now that we've got the ironing done, well, most of it, we can get started on our zips and our pockets. So this is the larger piece for the outer part of the fabric, and then I've got 4 pieces here of the narrow strips. We'll set to a side. So I've got 2 narrow strips, my larger piece, 2 zips, and we'll take the 2 plain pocket pieces as well. So you can see my zip's quite a lot larger. That doesn't matter. I'm going to trim that back later. All I need to do is place my zip over the top of the fabric here, and then grab my lining and making sure you've got the same width, place that over the top as well, and you can pin or clip these layers together. I am addicted to using double-sided tape, so I'm going to use that once again. Some people have trouble peeling the paper off. All you need to do is run your thumbnail over the edge here and just push that down, and that pushes the sticky residue into your fabric. And then you can usually separate that piece of paper from the top. We'll place our zip with the teeth faced down, and then I'll run another strip of tape over the top so that I could secure the lining of the pocket on that as well. So if this were a printed piece of fabric, I'd want the printed side facing the printed side. Okay, that's that end done. Let's flip this around and we'll do exactly the same at the other end. Grab the other zip, and with both of the zips I've put the opening end, which is the curved edge of the zip pull, that's facing my left. I've done the same on both sides. Then I'll grab my other lining and do the same. Now that we've got our lining and our zipper attached to the main fabric, we're going to take this to the machine, have the fusible side faced up, sew along here, and then when we've done that, we'll bring the fabric around to the back and we'll top stitch all the way across. We'll do that on both sides. Whilst we're at the machine, we'll take the handle fabric that we fused together earlier. So you can see here, it's got a nice crisp edge. That fusible tape has secured the layers of fabric really well inside. They're not going anywhere, and all I need to do is sew down both long edges. I'll do the handle first, then I'll change to my zipper foot. And rather than finishing at the end and turning around, I like to start back at the top end, and that helps prevent the handles from twisting out of shape. Okay, I've got my zipper foot on and I can sew straight down here. Once that's done, I'll just finger press this seam and the lining, and I'll just do a narrow top stitch right along there. If I were working with upholstery fabric or vinyl, I would increase my stitch length, but for this quilting cotton, I don't think it's necessary. Then I can flip it over and do the other side. I have the edge of my foot here running along the bump on the zipper teeth, so I just feel that as I go along. And we'll top stitch the other side as well. Okay, I can set the handle aside for now. I don't need that for a while. And we've just finished the top stitching on this piece here. So we've got our pocket linings sitting at the end here, and this is the main body of our bag. Let's take one of our narrow strips, and with your lining to the back, we'll place this over the top of our zip right here. Flip this fabric face down. I'll run some tape along there, and then I'll place this piece on the top edge of the zip. Line up the side edges here and then the top. Turn that around, run some more tape along the top of the zip, and then take the other end of your lining and place that to the top. Line up the side edges first and then the fabric at the top of the zipper tape. Once you've done that, you'll have your pocket lining enclosed on the inside of your fabric. So that can go to the machine and be stitched in place. First we'll do the other side. So we'll repeat this process as well. It really doesn't matter if you put your double-sided tape on your zip or on your fabric. That's personal choice and whatever's easier at the time. So you can do it either way. Those two narrow strips are ready to be stitched to the top of our zip. So we'll do that in a moment. Whilst we're at the machine, we might as well get our other pocket piece ready as well. So this is for the inside of the bag. It's 12 by 13 inches. We've got our 12 inches across this way. Fold that fabric in half. What we need to do here is sew up the short ends and come across, leaving an opening in the centre. Once we've done that, we'll be clipping the corners, and I'll do that at the machine. Then I'll turn it the right way out, and this folded edge along here, I'll do a narrow top stitch. So this is just the same as we did before. And when we do the top stitching on the top section here, we need to open the zip. So we'll open that all the way. And I like to turn this fabric around so that I've got the main body of the bag sitting at the top here. I've got the little piece sitting underneath. I've got my lining sitting to the back. And this end of the zip here, the closed end, I'm going to pop that behind my machine. The top fabric and the lining fabric to one side of the zip. And just carefully top stitch as you go. Now you don't necessarily have to top stitch using this method. I'll show you another way in a moment. But first we need to stitch the other piece of fabric together. So the other method that you can do for top stitching here, instead of having this piece of lining to the back of this piece of fabric, you can just keep that lining underneath, flip your fabric over, and then just go and top stitch all the way down this end. I tend to prefer the other method, and I'll explain why in a moment, but I will actually do this way so that I can give you an example later. Now this is the internal pocket. I've got the fold at the top here. I'm going to sew down the short edge part way across the other side and leave an opening. So I've stopped there with a back stitch. I only need a few fingers width of an opening, so I'll move on up and then start about here. Then I need to trim the corners. Turn it the right way out, and once you've turned that the right way, the folded edge at the top here is the edge that we're going to top stitch. Alright, we can set this pocket aside for the time being. We've still got an opening at the bottom here which we need to close up. That's fine, we'll do that later. Let's have a look at these zips. So we've got our pockets in place here. We've done the top stitching just on the top section of this side, and you can tell by the 2 rows of stitching here. This side here, you can see there's a little fold in the fabric up here. We've actually top stitched this to the top edge of our fabric. So if I show you the inside, and the reason why I prefer to top stitch through both layers is because a lot of times when you open and close a zip, the zip can often get caught in the fabric. Because I've top stitched the lining piece here away from the zip, it's not going to get caught in the fabric as easily as it might do on the other side. So this side here, I haven't top stitched through the lining. There's every chance that when the user opens and closes this bag, the lining might get in the way and it may not close properly. It might pinch. So it hasn't done that in this case, but it's the reason why I would rather top stitch through both layers of fabric. It doesn't make any difference to the pocket when it's finished, except for about 1/8 of an inch depth in the pocket. So it's up to you whether you top stitch through one layer or both layers. Now that we have this piece of fabric all sorted, we can determine what size we want our contrast fabric to be on the sides. So I've got 2 pieces. They're going to go along the side here. I also need to stabilize this before I put it together. Because I've stabilized this fabric, I also need to stabilize this. So what I can do now is measure the entire length of this piece. So it's about 23 1/8 of an inch. But whatever you do with your fabric, measure this first, just to double check, and then cut your fabric accordingly. I'm actually going to cut mine at 59 centimetres or 23 1/4 inches. If it's too long, I can trim it back. I'll cut those out, and I'll cut some stabiliser out as well. I'll go and fuse that onto the wrong side of these pieces. All right, what we can do now is take one piece, place that right side down over the top of your fabric along here, and we'll do the same for this side. Place that right side down. All right, so what I've done is I've placed my contrast fabric onto the sides, but one really important thing you need to do before you sew it is go to this end where your zip is, and you can see I've got the slider sticking out on this side here. This slider needs to be inside here. So all I'm going to do, just move that out of the way, open the zip up, keep the edges of the zip together, and if you need to, you can just put some adhesive tape along here just to hold it in place. But in this case, it's just as easy to clip it back together again and sew it up at the machine. So now I have my zip on the inside of the fabric where it should be. On the other end, I'll do the same thing, open up that zip and sit that nice and flat, and then place my fabric together again. We'll go back to the machine and we're going to sew all the way down both long edges. Once we've done that, we'll open it out and top stitch. As I go over any sections where the zips are or I have excess bulk, I'll always triple stitch over those. Seam allowance for this whole project is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So I'm basically just sewing right along the very edge of the stabiliser. Once you've sewn that in place, just double check that your zip's right. So if I close that up, you'll see that's looking nice at the end there, and I've just got the excess on the other side. And now I can top stitch. You want to decide which side of the fabric you're going to top stitch to. In this case, I've got my zip extending this way. If I top stitch on the other side, my zip's going to fold back, and I don't want that. I'm going to have my contrast fabric sitting over to my right, and I'll top stitch over the contrast fabric. Now when you're sewing along here and down past your zip, just make sure that metal tab is well out of the way of your stitching area. If it's in the way, then go around it or something, or cut it off. This one's plenty big enough though. So as I go, I just make sure that that seam is sitting underneath the green side. And I'll double check the pocket at this end as well. And if I don't like it, I can undo that stitching and redo it. So once that side's done, we can go around and sew the other side in place. As you're coming to your pockets, just make sure that your pockets are smoothed out underneath your fabric. All right, we've got both of our zippered pockets inserted into the fabric, and this is how everything's looking so far. So I've got the dark green on one side and the brighter green on the other side. Not sure which side I like best. Now that we have this piece of fabric, we need to work out what size we need for our lining. Before we do that, we can cut off the ends of the zip. So we don't need these bits here. In the cutting instructions, I'll have given you the measurements for this particular bag. But if you're using a number 5 zip or a different sized zip, you want to double check the measurements of the length of your fabric, because when you use a number 5 or an 8 or a 10 zip, the gap that you've got in here is going to be wider or narrower depending on the size of the zipper tape that you're actually going to be using. If you're not using the same size zip that I'm using here, double check the measurements along here before you cut this fabric out. It's always going to be better if you cut it out a little bit longer. You can always trim it back if you need to. Now that we have this big piece of fabric made up, we can measure it up for the lining. When I measure, I like to take a few measurements from the outside edge, the middle and the other end, and I'll also measure across this way as well, just to make sure I've got an even measurement. My fabric piece now is 23 1/4 by 16 3/4 inches, or 57 by 42.5 centimetres. I've also cut out 2 pieces of lining for the other narrow strips, and we're going to work on the next zip. This is for the top of the bag. This one needs to be 35 centimetres or 14 inches, or even longer if you have it. This was the only size I had available. We've got our stabiliser fused to the outside of these 2 pieces. Flip your outer fabric over, and we've got a 1 centimetre seam allowance. On one end only, we want this side and this side marked with a 2 centimetre or 3/4 inch mark. Now I've marked that on the other side just so that you can see whereabouts that marking is. So these two sides need to be facing each other here, and we need to have the same distance marked from the outside edge. I'm also going to mark my 1 centimetre seam allowance because when I sew the zip in place, I actually want to stop where my seam allowance is. We'll grab our lining, we'll do the same. I've got 2 centimetres and 1 centimetre marked on my sides there. Grab one of your outer fabric pieces, and I'm going to flip my zip face down. And on our zips we have a metal bar there. We don't want that in the way of our stitching when we get to it. Rather than lining the zipper tape up with the end of the fabric, I'm going to bring that across and just line up that metal bar with the end of the fabric. It'll be out of the way enough that it won't do any damage to our needles. And then we'll pin or clip it in place from that marking we've made at the 2 centimetres. You'll do the same with your lining. Grab the correct lining piece, place those pieces together, match up those marks, and you'll sew from here down to this mark that we've made. You won't go any further than that, and I'll show you what we're going to do at the machine. So if you're going to use double-sided tape, I'll run it all the way from the edge here up to that 2 centimetre line and place your zip over the top. We want this end of the zip to extend beyond the end of the fabric. You can do this one layer at a time if you're not confident. Line up the 2 layers of fabric, and we'll go and do this one now before we sew the other piece on. I'm going to start sewing from the end where the zip is open the furthest. Start stitching at the 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch mark, and at the end you'll finish the same distance from the end. I'm coming up to the mark I've made here. I'm going to stop. I'll back stitch a little way, and that's just to get this tab out of my way. Raise the top fabric, flip the zipper tape out of the way. So what I like to do is go back just on the diagonal and forward. That just helps keep that in place. Then I will stop at the 1 centimetre seam line. And what you have here is your zipper tape finished nicely at the end of your fabric. This technique is also commonly known as a butler method. I haven't top stitched this yet. I'll do that when I finish the other side. So if you close up your zip, you're going to have a nice neat finish along the edge here, and we've left enough room to be able to fold our seam allowance over later. Now we need to do the same for this side. I've run some double-sided tape along the edge there, stopped at the 2 centimetre mark, and I'll place this over the top of here, lining up the side edge. Double check those pieces of fabric match up, and then we can place our lining over the top. Then once again I'll start at the closed end, sew down here, and when I get to here I'll repeat the same process for the end of the zipper tape. Just remember not to start right at the top end. We'll come in 1 centimetre from the edge. So once again I've stopped at the 2 centimetre marking I've made. I'll backstitch, raise my foot, take the tape here and flip it out to the side, and you can see that 1 centimetre line here. I'm going to sew up to that. Once you've sewn both sides of the zipper tape into your little flap here, press the edges of your fabric on both sides so that they sit nice and flat. And we're not going to top stitch just yet. We do need to fold the end seams under. And I did forget to mention one thing. At both ends we want to stop stitching 1 centimetre from the end. So we don't want to stitch over our seam allowance. When I started sewing at this end here, I should have started sewing from here with a back stitch rather than sewing at the very end. It's not a problem, I can just undo a few stitches there. So spread the lining apart, and with that 1 centimetre seam open at the end there, flip it over, fold that edge in. For the outer fabric you'll do the same, then bring the outer fabric to meet up with the lining, and then clip those edges together. Do the same on this side, and with your lining, and we'll bring those edges together as well. And you want to do that at the other end. Before we do that, we'll trim off the excess. It is a little fiddly folding these edges over, but as I always say, if you hold your tongue just the right way, you'll get there. Okay, once you've got all of those fiddly bits folded under, and it looks nice and neat back and front, and we can sew along the short edge, along the top, doing the top stitch, and then along the short edge again. You can close up the bottom edge if you want to, and do the same for this side. I'm going to open my zip out. And then come up along the top edge. And we'll repeat for the other side. We finished our zipper panel. We need a tab for the end of our zip here, just to make it look a little bit nicer. This piece is 3.5 by 1.5 inches. If you're using a number 5 or a bigger zip, you'll need to have a little bit more width. So what you can do is just take your fabric, fold the edges over the side there, and as long as you have enough fabric to fold over the sides, that's all you need in the width. For the length, that's up to you as well. It depends on how long you want your tab to be. Up to you whether you want to cut off this metal tab. It's probably safer to do that, just in case you accidentally stitch over it, but I'm going to live dangerously and leave it on there. Fold the tab in half and set a crease. And you also want to set the creases for the fabric to fold over your zipper tape. And we also want to fold in the raw edge at the short end. And then you can bring those folded edges together. What we're going to do is place this folded edge under our zip. My metal tab is well away from any area that I'm going to be stitching, because I'm not going to be stitching on the diagonal. And once again, if you're really not confident, cut that off and bring your tab down a little bit further. Fold the edges over. Fold those edges in and the end, and bring this edge up to meet the other end. Then I'll line up those edges. I'm going to sew across here, along the side, down the end, and along the side again. I'm not going to do a cross purely because I've left that metal tab on the end there. It really doesn't need it either. Alright, our tab is finished. Let's get on to the next step. Now you may notice that my contrast fabric is quite a bit smaller than it was before. It's because I made a huge mistake and I've had to modify this pattern. On the screen I've gone and given you the correct measurements according to what I'm using now. Let's find our fabric for our handles. You can make your handles whatever length you like. I've taken the full width of fabric, and that's about 44 inches, which is about 1.10 meters. Fold that in half and cut that into 2 pieces. From the contrast edge, we'll measure 3 centimeters or 1.25 inches. Keeping your handle nice and flat, come around to the other side and measure the same. Flip it over, and we'll do the same on the other side. Because I'm using this ombre fabric, I'm going to match up my light and dark colours. So those are my handles ready to be stitched. I'll quickly go and do that now. All right, we've got the handles in place. Let's take our recessed zip, and with the same side opening over here, matching up with the side that we're opening on the zips on this side, we'll place the fabric right side together, so we want our printed sides facing. Line that up in the middle, and then we'll take our lining piece and we'll place that with the right side facing the right side. So we're sandwiching this recessed zipper panel in the middle, and we can sew that in place. Again, we've got our 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance. We've got one part of our recessed panel in place. Flip the fabric around, place your handle down, and we can take this panel and bring that up to the other end. And we'll line that up just like we did before, and then we can grab the other end of our lining and bring that up as well. So we can sandwich all of those layers together, and we'll stitch right along the top there as well. So we've done that. We've got our lining and our outer fabric separated from each other. You can turn this the right way out just to have a look and make sure everything looks all right. So there's a handle at the top there and our recessed panel and what will be the inside of our bag. From here we want to make sure we've got our zip open. Turn everything inside out again, separate the outer fabric from the lining. We just want to make sure this excess zipper tape sits inside the bag. So I'll just clip that over so that it doesn't get in the way, and we can line up our side seams and then distribute that fabric evenly all the way along. Now we don't have an opening in this fabric at the bottom. We're going to leave an opening on one side of the lining. So I'll leave about a hand's width here. And we'll do the same for the other side. First of all, line up the top edge of your bag and then the side seams. Let's take this to the machine. We'll sew all the way down here, and on this side here we'll sew all the way along, stop here with a back stitch, start again here and finish up there. I've stopped with a back stitch here. I'm going to leave a substantial opening, and we'll finish up the other side. All right, we've done the side seams. Before we box the corners, I'm going to show you that there's another option that you can use for this bag. So I'll turn it the right way out. If you decide you want to leave this as a very flat bag, you can certainly go ahead and do that. We do have the recessed zipper panel sitting in here, which would give you a decent opening at the top of the bag. So if you wanted to, you could leave it exactly like this and not worry about boxing the corners. I'm not going to leave it like this. I just wanted you to know that there is that option. If you want to keep this as a flat bag, you would top stitch the edges and leave it like this. But I have other plans for this bag, so we're going to turn it inside out again. All right, now that we've got everything nice and flat, we will just make some small box corners from the stitching line and from the folded edge of the fabric. We're going to have the same measurement. So ignore that my fabric is kinked in a little bit here. That's where I'd made a mistake earlier. On the bottom edge where the fold is, from my stitching line, I'm measuring 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from the stitching line as well as the folded edge. I'll do that on this side as well. Again, from the stitching line, not the outside edge. And we'll do the same on the lining. Instead of cutting our corners out, all we're going to do is fold the ears in like you can see here. Sometimes it makes it easier if you mark both sides of your fabric. On my corners, I've marked both sides. Now you've got two options here. You can cut the fabric out on the line, but if you do that, you're going to need to stitch your box corners, and so then you'll end up having a much bigger box corner because that will become your stitching line. Therefore your bag will be smaller and narrower as well. So rather than cutting out the corners, we're going to sew on the corner. To do that, grab your lining fabric, find the point in that corner, pinch that together, do the same on this side, pinch that together, and you're going to have a nice straight line going across the triangle. That will be your stitching line. So you'll see that on both sides. So that square becomes a nice straight line for stitching. Spread the fabric out, pinch the corners, and sew across there. So I've done that for the other end. We'll go and take that to the machine and stitch them up. Then I'll do the same for the other three corners. Alright, there's our little ears that need to be trimmed off on the lining and the outer. So all you need to do is just cut straight across there. Now I have a question for viewers. I'm often asked, why do I cut out my box corners rather than boxing my corners all in one go like this? The reason I do that in some videos is for you viewers. I actually prefer this technique for cutting out my corners. I have less errors that way, and my fabric is much more stable as well. I'd much rather sew up and cut out my box corners this way, but I do actually do it the other way so that viewers can understand box corners a little bit better. So I guess my question is to beginners. Do you prefer me to do my box corners this way? Or would you prefer me to do them the way I have been doing them in lots of other videos where I cut out the box corners first? Whether you're new or experienced, let me know which way you'd prefer to see it. Of course, I'll still do it both ways. Okay, enough rambling. Let's get in and finish up this bag. Poke out the corners at the bottom there. Now, just like we turned this out the right way before, if you want to have just box corners on the bottom of your bag and the recessed zip, then you can finish up your bag with a little bit of top stitching and close up the inside of the bag. I do have one more step that I want to do, but before we do that, we'll go and top stitch all the way around the top edge. We want this zipper panel to sit inside our bag, and we want the lining, of course, to be sitting inside our bag as well. So I'll clip all the edges together, get this ready for top stitching. Top stitching is much easier if I have the bag inside out, because then I can see what I'm sewing as I go. Place your zipper panel to the inside of the bag, so have the handle sitting up, fold that panel down and just neaten that all up. Okay, so the edges have been clipped together. You can see the lining is sitting to the inside of the bag, and this zipper panel here is inside the bag, and we've got the excess zip around here. It's a little bit tight, but all you need to do is clip all of those edges together, and we can now go and take this to the machine and top stitch. I usually like to start on a side seam, so I'll start along here and just sew all the way around the top. When I get to this section here where the zip is a little bit tight in the fabric, I'll just go slow, manipulate the fabric around as I go. Okay, away we go. I'm coming up around here where I've got the end of the zip. I just want to make sure that's out of the way. Take your time going around the side. Move the zip out of the way. And once you reach the halfway mark, that's easy. Now whilst I'm at the machine, I might as well close up this opening that we have here. pinch the edges together, tuck all those straggly bits inside, and we can top stitch. All right, let's turn this the right way out. And if you're happy with your bag having box corners on the bottom there and it's sitting like this, then you're completely finished and you can go and have fun. We'll have our 2 pockets on the back and the front, plus I forgot to sew the pocket to the inside. I had a piece all sorted ready to sew the pocket to the inside. I completely forgot to put that in there. If you want this pocket, before you do anything with your lining, place this pocket 3 inches down from the top of your lining on one side and sew it in place along here. I would do a channel or 2 to have some pens and glasses sitting in there. So if you want to have this pocket on the inside, stitch that to the lining before you go and finish your bag. Otherwise, if you like option number 2, your bag is finished. Now let's go for option number 3. That's what I wanted to do in the first place, so that's what we're going to do. Push your lining down deep into your corner. Just pinch that edge together and we'll clip that in place just to make sure the lining sits in there. Do that on this side as well. It's just to keep the lining in place. From the center line here out to the corner of the box, my measurement is 1 inch, which is what I wanted for my box corner. At this top edge, I want to measure 1 inch as well. Pop a pin in there. I'll do that on the other side. And at the other end. What I'd like to do here is top stitch from this corner up to this corner here. So you can just clip the edges there and then do a narrow top stitch. To help the lining fabric sit right next to the outer fabric, I like to use a skewer. I'll pop that skewer in. It'll go right down to the corner here. Line up the skewer at the top where the pin is. And then the rest of the fabric can line up along that skewer or stick. You can use a knitting needle, anything. The narrower that you can find, the better though. So that's given us a nice straight edge along here, and it's also forced the lining to sit in right along the edge of the fabric. Do that for all 4 sides that I want to sew. Again, I'll pop that skewer in right at the end. And then when you've got both skewers in there, you can just fold those edges in. Just see that they line up nicely. And if they do, you can go and stitch it. We're not going to leave this in our fabric when we sew. It's really just there so that we can actually clip everything together and get it all lined up nicely. I've got my bamboo skewers sitting in there. Now that I've clipped the edges together, I can take them straight out. The fabric's not going to shift whilst I sew it. And I won't break any needles. Once we've done that, the bag is finished. It doesn't matter whether you start at the top edge or the bottom. I'm doing about a 1/8 of an inch top stitch. And when I get to the bottom, I'm just going to sew to the bottom of the box corner seam. And then I can do the other 3 sides. All right, there we have it. Our bag is completely finished. We've done the top stitching along the side edges here. You could go one step further and do the same thing along the bottom edge here, just to give it a really nice square base. I don't think I want that top stitched along the bottom, although it's not too late for me to change my mind. Maybe you guys can tell me what you think. Should I top stitch this bottom edge to be in line with the side edge here. We've got a nice big zippered pocket on the front, another one on the back. We've got our zipper tab along the top here, and if you remember to put your pocket in on the inside, then you've got a nice big pocket on the inside as well. I've just stuck that in with some double-sided tape. Great big spacious bag with 3 different finishing options. You ever get one of those projects that just give you a headache from start to finish? For me, this was it. I had all these great ideas in mind. I wanted all of these pockets and zips and all sorts of things, wider contrast on the side, and it didn't quite go as I planned. I still like the bag. It's still a really cute bag. If I didn't tell you I made a mistake, you wouldn't know. So there's me telling you everything I do wrong. I really like this bag. I love the colours. It's very cute. A bigger version of this would make a really nice nappy bag or a diaper bag. Setting aside the mistakes that I made, I think this bag's turned out pretty cute. 2 big zips in the front and the back, the recessed zip across the centre. And if you make this, hopefully you'll remember to put that pocket on the inside, and then you'll have a 3rd pocket inside the bag as well. I still haven't decided whether or not I want to top stitch the bottom edge. Let me know what you think. That could be option 4, couldn't it? I probably will still do that. I won't be selling this bag. This one was just something to make. I felt like making another bag. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.